Hello there, YouTube makers, and thank you so much for joining me on my channel today. I really appreciate you spending your time with me. I'm looking forward right now to demonstrating how I'm going to mill the channels on the journal boxes in which the arch bars of the tender frame are going to sit. This is really the first precise milling done on this project and any part of this project so far in the book. And Kozo isn't very clear on how exactly to obtain very accurate line. And the way to do that is with a tool called a center finder. In my case, I'll be using a Serret 827. They come in two versions, an A and a B version. This skill and this tool is going to provide huge dividends throughout this build and for any mill work which I intend to do. I'm really looking forward and excited to demonstrating this for you. And please be sure to stay to the end of the video because I'll give you an assessment of this mill on this part of the build, as well as a journeyman tip and trick of the day. That's right, it's a twofer today. So come on over here and join me at the bench and let's make some chips.
To begin things off, I'm going to bring in my work pretty slowly. Of course, here in the video, I've got things sped up to between anywhere from 2 to 4 times. Otherwise, it would take a very long time, but you can see as it makes contact, it reduces the eccentric wobble. And then all of a sudden, right when I'm at the correct spot, it kicks off. And this tool is designed to kick off. And that's where I'm going to stop and take a mental note of my reading. This center finder, the Serret 827A, that finding tip is exactly 0.200. Very precisely and very well made. Now I'm just going to move it out of the way of the block and then bring it in that 1 thou so that now the spindle is dead center on the corner. I've gone ahead and swapped it out to a 3/16 end mill, and I'm going to use a previous journeyman's trick of the day or tip of the day to use a piece of paper to set the height just above my workpiece. And that'll bring it in to within 4,000. This piece of paper really probably brings it anywhere from 3.3 to 3.5 thou. So it'll really allow me to see that whether or not my piece is canted, and I'm going to use my loop to verify that all my measurements and dimensions are in place. I'm going to make sure I machine these 1/16 slips because everything in here is 16ths and it's just super duper complicated. And I went with a 3/16 because I thought it would be keeping in 16ths makes things easier. Well, converting over to fractions and 16ths and splitting it to 30 seconds is so much harder, like going down this mid channel. Now getting this cutter into the dead center is going to require it to be from the 0.21875. So it's going to be 4 rotations and about 19 thou, because 3/4 of 10 thou, so that's about 19 thou. And I'm going to come in with my loop and check it out and look, because this is going to set where the holes are going to be placed for the retaining screws for the arch bars. And running it all the way across seems pretty even. So my screws should in theory be no more than 1/4 of 10 thou off of absolute dead center. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring everything back to 0. And with these layout lines, I'm going to check to make sure that all my calculations and all my conversions from fractions are correct. So here I'm going to be moving over 281 thousandths. So that's 5 turns plus 31 thousandths. And I'm going to look at the edge of my cutter and kind of rotate it around. And I really like that I'm seeing that the cutter is just dead center of my layout lines. So it gives me pretty good confidence that my dimensions are correct. And I'm going to check it the entire length, and I can see that it is just riding on that layout line. So my block's not weird or canted or anything. So that's great. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring it back to 0 and check out the lip on this other edge. And it's going to be at 156,000. So from 0, that's going to be 3 rotations plus 6,000. And we do the same thing, kind of bring it in, bring it online, take a look at my loop, turn the cutter a little bit and see that it is right there splitting the layout line. And I bring it all the way over and check it again. And I'm going to go ahead and re-zero it, and then I'm going to get ready to make some chips. Of course, hearty dabble of cutting fluid. I brought it down 5,000, so it's going to be a really light first skim cut, just to kind of get a baseline. Because I already know that it's going to take more than one full rotation, so I'm only running this back over about 3,000s. And instead of going back to 0, I'm going to bring it over the other side and cut the channel. And looks pretty good. It looks like that cutter is splitting right dead center on the layout line, and it's cut it right in half. Now I'm going to bring it over and machine out this first intro lip. At this point, I've done one full rotation on the Z-axis and cut about 50 thousandths out of this channel. Here I'm going to take one final 5 thousandths cut. Now previously I have gone up to 10, 15, 20, and even 25,000 depths of cuts with interesting and varying results. Now I have been going back after taking the first initial cut down the middle in order to do the face closest to me, but I found that to be very tedious, and pretty immediately as soon as I started the other side, I had gotten familiar with the number of rotations and the positioning of the hand wheel and taking up the slack or backlash, that I just went to the correct number of rotations. But doing this first one this way, going back across, helped me to really learn and memorize those cuts. Now at this point, this 1/16 lip has not changed in width at all. I line up my hand wheels on 0, and this wonderful little Shoreline machine cuts the exact same position. And I've been watching very closely those layout lines, and they have not shrank, they have not receded at all. They are sharp and clear just as much as the first cut. So I'm really impressed by the performance and repeatability of this machine. It's just absolutely fantastic. Now, these little Nicholson Swiss cut files do a fantastic job. Previously, I've been working with kind of an off-brand imported version, and they were fine when doing work on styrene and other plastics. But for this, they were just not acceptable in their performance. I'm really glad I found these. I do understand, though, that you can get actually Swiss-made Swiss cut files from jewelers, and they're supposed to be unbelievably good. Get all the filings off and take this first depth measurement. I'm going to be coming in, it looks like, at 52 thousandths and a half. So I'm going to split that in half and take 5 thousandths off, remeasure, re-deburr. But I'm not going to show you that first 5,000. I'm just going to skip ahead right here to my final 5 thousandths finishing cut. And I moved the Z-axis down 5 thousandths, it removed 5 thousandths. So I went ahead, dropped in another 5 thousandths, so for a total of 10 thousandths. And this is that finishing cut. It's running very smoothly. I'm taking a little bit more time here to remove chips because this is going to be my finish cut and make sure everything's nice and well oiled, and doing nothing but conventional cuts this whole time. Even to this point, 62 thousandths of material removed, multiple passes. These tiny little lines that are left over from the layout lines are still pristine in there. They haven't eroded at all, and there's no weird steppings. As long as I'm lining up my dials and hand wheels to the zeros in the correct position and got the correct number of counts, this machine's been fantastically consistent and really gives me a boost in confidence that I'm doing the right thing and that these are going to be machined to a very high degree level of precision and not just putting in a couple layout lines and then hogging them out. I have it deburring again. There really wasn't much of any burr at this point. I probably could have skipped it, but better safe than sorry. Yeah. And check it again with my depth micrometer. And here I've gone my last 5 thousandths, and it brings it right down into 62 and a half, which matches perfectly to the fractional measurement provided by Kozo Hero. So I'm very happy with that and really glad that this finishing cut went well. But there are problems, and this is one of them. So pay attention to what's happening in the block. This is my attempt to do a 25,000 cut, and Do you see that little skip?
Nope, it moved.
Let's take a closer look. See that?
Nope,
As I said, it moved, and I was upset. But everyone's always asking me, what is the capabilities? What is the capacity of this machine? And there are limits, and those limits really come down to setup.
I really don't like to give a, well, it depends answer. And in terms of rigidity for setup, it is very much of a, well, it depends kind of answer. In my instance, on my machine, I have got a headstock in there that came with my mill package 8. To some extent, this of course does increase leverage in terms of the interaction between the headstock and the saddle. So as I saw kind of going into a 20 thousandths cut, there started to be a little bit more vibration. And then when I went to that 25,000 cut, that was just too much for this situation. But had my workpiece been more secure in the vise, I might have been okay with that level of vibration, which me personally I'm not, and been able to take that kind of heavier cut. Regardless, using a 3/16 cutter, taking the cuts that I was, and with my setup, any kind of cutting above 15,000 was not something I wanted to do, and 25 was simply too much. That actually brings us to the journeyman trick and tip of the day. Using a center fire versus simply using layout lines addresses some issues in a unknown brand machine that's been imported that might have a poor or an eccentric rotation of the quill, or perhaps maybe something like that's very popular, like a Bridgeport, but one that is significantly worn out and needs a serious need of a head rebuild, will have high spots in its rotation. And using a center finder accommodates or addresses those eccentric travels and allows the user to find the true dead center of the quill. Now, for today's journeyman tip of the day. It isn't enough just to crank in the center finder and bump it on the edge. Keep in mind, when the center finder is being used, it's designed to kick off. To use it properly requires consistency. And even if you're not exact the first couple times and learning the backlash and the motion and the movement of the machine, you want to keep cranking that handle and doing it over and over again until you consistently get the same reading. Because there can be many factors that affect how the center finder performs. Maybe the gibs are a little bit tighter or looser in some spots, which is especially prominent in import machines or maybe machines whose ways are a little bit more worn out. Perhaps lubrication as set up. One day you can go from a nice warm fall or summer day, and then in the midst of winter, that lubrication gets a little bit more sluggish and thicker and the feel changes. Let's see how that is applied and what it looks like for drilling the holes on the journal boxes.
There's a lot of finesse that goes into the hand movements in order to use the center finder. And focusing on the tip of the center finder, I'm watching that movement until it just kicks off. And then I'm going to look at my dial, and I'm at 23 thousandths, and take a mental note. And I'm going to do it again. And not looking at the dial, but looking at the center fire, seeing where it kicks off. There. And then confirming that position as many times as it takes to consistently get a couple of readings that are the exact same. It takes a lot of concentration not to want to look at the dial and to force the dial to fit. But once I do, I'm going to line it up. But as you can see, I've taken up the slack and I've accidentally let the dial slide a little bit. So I'm going to have to reconfirm, which I should do anyways. So that's close to zero. Close to zero. It's a little off, about almost a thou off, but not quite a thou off. But I'm getting pretty consistent readings. So I'm going to try to readjust the hand wheel again without moving it. And that really is kind of the key here, is developing that feel and that consistent movement to get the same reading over and over again to where it kicks off on the same number. And whether you're an old hand or a new hand at this, doing it a couple times until you're consistent is just good journeyman tip of the day practice. I am really impressed and really like these components provided by Sureline in this mill package A. This chuck works perfectly. I've got my center drill and it just lines up unbelievably centered on the edge of this journal box. So I think I've really gotten my center finding down and I'm happy with that. So I've brought in the distance to just do a little indent. I'm not going to go very deep. I just want it deep enough in order to allow me to get the cutting flutes level with the surface I've just machined. Some people like to, at this point, swap out and put in the drill bit, but because I'm so confident in the repeatability and consistency of the machine, I'm going to go ahead and center drill this second hole with the correct number of rotations I've calculated. Everything seems to line up well and seems to be the correct distances from either end, so visually it passes that muster. I'm not entirely convinced that using a drilling jig is going to save any time or make for a more precision placement of these holes, because doing it with the center finder makes it consistent, and I'm always going to have the same reference points to go back to, or datum points. I'm going to go ahead and insert a American made, and this is a brand new number 45 drill bit, and 45 is called for by Kozo Hiroka. This is pretty easy, no alignment issues here because I'm still at the same setting, and I'm just going to get it down just enough to where, like I said, those cutting flutes are level with the machine surface, and I'm going to bring it out just a tiny bit more. And then I'm going to zero out my Z-axis and go ahead and drill this. Now, it is a very different experience drilling on a mill than it is on a drill press. It feels very different, and the way it proceeds feels different, and it's something to get a little bit used to, I think. But because this mill is so repeatable, I can now just do the second hole, and because I've got my first zero set, I know I'm going to be able to have the exact same depth of these holes. It makes it pretty straightforward and easy peasy, I think. Now, when it's all said and done, visually they're right down the center of it, and in fact it's correlated to kind of the burnishing or the finish left on by the end mill, and each one is a very uniform and looks right the same distance from either end. And I'm really looking forward to putting together some arch bars and seeing how well they line up and how precise I can drill those holes to match this part.
I have a special shout out and thank you to everyone who commented on the tram video. Your advice has been fantastic and a lot of help, and I was able to apply it here for this part of the build, resetting up my vise after using it on the lathe. So that you never miss any parts of my build or any other great journeyman tips and tricks of the day, be sure to hit that subscribe button as well as the bell notification. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I really appreciate it. Till next time, have fun out there, stay safe, and keep making chips.